Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is National Consumer Protection Week, and the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff is hosting webinars throughout the week to celebrate and inform consumers about their protections and rights. Today's webinar is on electric and natural gas utilities, consumer protections and rights. We do have other webinars throughout the week, and I would encourage you to register for those in the different industries that the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff works in. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone should have entered on mute, but we do ask that you remain on mute throughout the presentation. And also you can turn your video on, or you can leave your video off if you would like to. We have a chat box through the Zoom platform that we can take questions. So if you have any questions, please place those in the chat box, and we will either get to them during the presentation if it is something timely or about the topic that we're currently talking about, or we will get to them at the end of the webinar. So go ahead and feel free to put those in the chat box at any point during the presentation. And we are recording today's webinar, so this recording will be available after the webinar concludes. We will post this to our YouTube channel, and also we will share the link on our website, ors.sc.gov. So my name is Landon Masters, and I'm the Community Outreach and Communications Manager for the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff, or the ORS. And like I said, we're celebrating National Consumer Protection Week. National Consumer Protection Week is coordinated by the Federal Trade Commission, and it encourages consumers to take full advantage of their consumer rights and make better informed decisions. So really focusing on empowering the consumer with the information and the tools they need to make better informed decisions, and to protect themselves against scams or anything else that may come in their way, especially in a time now that we're in with COVID. We are seeing a lot of this increase. Folks are at home, they're getting calls and doing things that they may not do on a normal basis because they're in such a different time now. So we at the ORS are really trying to make sure that consumers are informed. The spin that we take on Consumer Protection Week is looking at the industries that we work in, since we do represent the consumers' interest, the public interest of consumers and the investor-owned utilities. And that public interest of the consumers is the continued investment in high quality and reliable services. So that's making sure that the consumer is getting high quality service, and that service is also reliable for not an astounding rates as low as they can be, to still have high quality and reliable service. That is our job at the ORS, to investigate when the utility comes in and asks for a rate increase, or there are other kind of cases that are going on. Investor-owned utilities being what we're talking about today, electric and natural gas. So this is Duke, Dominion, Lockhart Power, and then we have the Piedmont Natural Gas, other investor-owned natural gas utilities that are going before the Public Service Commission. And the Public Service Commission of South Carolina is the state agency that makes the decision on these rates. So when they come in, it's not the ORS that is saying this is what it is. The PSC takes all that information that the ORS and other entities, interveners, and consumer input in those cases to make a decision and present an order on what the rate would be. So we at the ORS are looking at Consumer Protection Week as a way to let consumers know about their rights and how they can be involved in that process that can sometimes be very, very confusing. And today I have Takesha Waller here with us, who's going to give us some great information about the consumer protections and rights about electric and natural gas utilities. Also walk through the process of being involved and ways the consumer can be involved in the process. So with that, I will turn it over to Takesha. And while she's giving her presentation, remember, put some questions there in the chat box, and she's a wealth of knowledge, so I'm sure she'll be able to answer those questions for you.
Thank you, Landon, and he's really set the bar high with the wealth of knowledge, but thank you so much. And good morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us and taking the time out of your schedule to join in on our webinar this morning. As Landon said, my name is Takesha Waller. I am an investigator here with the Office of Regulatory Staff. So we deal a lot more with the consumer directly. So we hear a lot of the things that the consumers are feeling. We hear a lot of the questions that the consumers have, and we hear a lot of the problems that they have as well. And one of the things that we're wanting to do, as Landon said, is kind of tell them, you know, what their rights are, kind of give them an expectation of what they should know. And by knowing more, they know how to properly handle when things arise that they may not be able to handle on their own. And so what we want to do is provide them with the information so that they know these are the steps and these are some of the information to make you better prepared to handle situations that arise. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin our presentation. All right, the first one is established service. Most people know that you have the right to establish service with a utility. One thing that people kind of get a little confused with is number one here, with the utility cannot deny a consumer from applying for service. Now, what that means is every person can apply for service. It does not necessarily mean that service will be connected for that consumer. There may be outstanding situations that have occurred where they require more information, or there's a problem at the property itself that will not allow the consumer to actually get the service established, but they cannot be denied the right to apply. And so we get calls a lot of times, well, there's someone that they're saying is squatting on their property, and they've just contacted the utility to request service. Why didn't the utility service deny them the fact of being able to apply? They don't have that right. They have to allow someone to apply for service. A consumer may need to provide access to their property. A lot of people think that just because they're getting service, that they don't have to allow the utility onto their property because it is their private property. They will need to sometimes have access because they need to verify for safety reasons if everything on the property is functioning the way that it should be, specifically for gas. If you're getting gas established, the company needs to do an inspection. And sometimes that means actually entering the home, because they don't want to establish service in an area that's dangerous and something is hooked up improperly. And now there's fault because they have gone in, established this service in a dangerous situation. So the consumer needs to understand that they may need to have access to their property given to the utility in order to connect service. The consumer may be required to post a deposit, and the deposit amounts can vary. We get a lot of calls coming in from consumers with questions about the deposit. Can the company charge a deposit? The amount of deposit, again, that varies. What the companies do is they will do a credit check for that particular consumer, and the credit check will come back to advise the utility what the consumer may have to pay as far as the deposit is concerned. But there's also other issues that can determine that as well. If there's a charge-off situation from a particular consumer, then the amount of the deposit can change as well. And they also may be required to pay that amount before the service is connected. So we want to make sure that they understand, yes, the utility does have the right, based on the regulations, to impose a deposit before they can establish service. This is another hot topic that we get in reference to disconnection of service, because a lot of times people don't understand the process for disconnection of service. You have the right to get written notice prior to your services being disconnected. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the notice, your initial notice sometimes will come on your bill if you have a past due balance. So that not less than 10 days prior to termination of service, the utility shall mail a notice of termination to the affected customer. And we have to keep reiterating to consumers, be sure to read your bills. It sounds very elementary, but it is something we definitely have to reiterate when we're talking to consumers, because we have people that sometimes will just open the bill to look at just the amount due, or the past due amount due, or the minimum amount, but they need to make sure that they're looking at the bill, because that initial disconnection notice is on that bill. Now, after you've received that one, not more than 2 business days prior to termination of service, the utility shall make reasonable effort, either by phone or in person, sometimes through a door tag. They'll let the consumer know that your service is in jeopardy of disconnection. We've also found that they may use text messaging to alert customers to let them know that their service is in jeopardy of being disconnected. But the regulations do state that they have to notify a consumer that they are in jeopardy of disconnection. One other thing that I wanted to, if there's a deferred payment plan, and I'll get more into the deferred payment plan setup, but as far as disconnection is concerned, when there are deferred payment plans set up in place, the service can be terminated within 3 days, and that's because they've already set an additional time period for a payment agreement. So they'll be notified of that deferred payment situation and the disconnection that's associated with that in notice form. Now, as far as payment plans are concerned, a lot of times we get calls from consumers, especially in this time. We're in a pandemic right now. We have people who are out of work, who are in financial straits right now. You know, the money that they were getting, they're, excuse me, not currently getting because they're out of work, or they're having to use that for other means. So we do understand that right now the times are tight, and that people do need payment plans in order to try and keep their services from being disconnected. And one thing that we want to make sure that consumers understand is that you do have the right to set up a payment plan before your service is disconnected. The deferred payment plan, by definition, requires the consumer to keep the account current and pay no less than 1/6 of the outstanding balance. And a deferred payment is also defined as any agreement to extend or defer a payment cutoff date by more than 5 working days. Now, what we also need to make sure when we set up different payment agreements, we work with the consumer and the company to try to come up with the best means to help the customer not lose their power. But what we need to make sure is that it's not always going to be exactly what the consumer is wanting us to get for them. The payment plan will be the best option, because sometimes they may want to pay a very small amount to get on a payment plan, but what happens at the end, the balance is such a large amount that that consumer will be required to pay that it's actually not doing any help for them. It's harming them, because it's more likely to not be feasible for them to actually keep up with that payment agreement. So we do our best effort to make sure that we explain that to the consumer, that, you know, paying this amount will break your payments up into X number of payments and X number of dollars per month. And by you have to make sure you're keeping your bill current, that will mean there's an additional amount plus your bill that's going to be required each month. And because we've done this for so long, we understand and want to make sure that the customer understands that each month you're going to be paying this additional amount with your bill when it's due, so that they're not sticker shock when the bill comes and they're seeing the actual amount that they're having to pay each month for their utilities. And if they have questions in reference to that, we always take the time to break it down and make sure that they understand it. The next question, next topic that we have is meters. We are finding that because utilities now are upgrading meters, and they're putting meters in place for consumers to be more efficient for the consumer and to be more accurate. We do find that sometimes there may be errors that happen because it's equipment, and sometimes equipment are faulty. Sometimes things happen, but they're in an effort now to try to make sure that the meters that they're giving to the consumers are the most quality ones. And so we want to make sure that because of these things, that the consumers know that you do have the right for your meter to be tested for accuracy. Sometimes we get calls from consumers and they're saying that they have a high bill. Well, one of the questions that we'll ask is, have you had your meter tested? And a lot of the times the customers have not, because they did not realize that they actually could contact the utility and request to have their meter tested. So we'll explain that they do have that right, and then we'll usually contact the company, to verify when was the last test on this customer's meter. Was it functioning properly? Because each utility shall, at the time when requested in writing by a consumer, and even though the regulation is saying in writing, it doesn't have to be in writing. The consumer can actually call the company to request a test. But upon reasonable notice, test the accuracy of the meter that the consumer has in their location. And in the event that there is an error found to be more than 2%, increase or decrease the bill accordingly. So what happens is we'll have the utility to go out, test the meter, they'll get the results back to us, and we'll review to make sure that it's within that 2% up or down, to make sure that there is no actual issue going on with that consumer's meter. If we do find that there is some faulty situation, and maybe the meter has stopped. We have had situations where the meter has completely stopped, and we, at that point, will notify the customer that, okay, you had an issue where your meter had stopped, and the company is having to replace that meter on your property. And so you have the right to have the utility explain the method of reading your bill. And a lot of times that is more specifically when the utility is reading the meter. The meters are read in a certain sequence in a particular area. And a lot of times we'll get calls from consumers that want to change their bill due date, which is based upon when their meters are read. And we do not have the jurisdiction to require the company to change that bill due date based on when their meter is read. Now, we do, like I said previously, can possibly set up payment arrangements to change or extend the due date that bill is due, but actually changing a bill due date based on when the meter or the frequency of that meter is read, we do not have that jurisdiction. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear first. But unless there are extenuating circumstances that prevent meters from being read, the bills are rendered on a monthly basis, not less than 28 days and no more than 34 days. And there are some times when something may happen, usually that may be around the holidays. And the reason why, because you have employees who are out on leave or who are on vacation who won't be able to physically get out to verify the meters, or there's some sort of snowstorm or some type of storm that prevents them from being able to get those meters read. Now, with the upgrades of the meters that are being put on locations now, this is a little less likely to happen because they're now having the meters to be able to be read remotely, which means they don't have to physically go out to read the meters. So the likelihood of getting those meters read in a timely fashion is a lot more likely now. But there are some people who will still have meters physically read because that is what they have chosen. Okay, the explanation of bills. As I pointed to earlier, it is imperative that consumers are actually reading their bills. We are finding one example that I had a consumer who had an issue 25 years on his bill, and he never read the bill. He just paid the amount and never went back to read it and realized that there was something that he had on his bill that he had removed, and he never saw that. So it is imperative that you are checking your bill to make sure that everything on your bill is correct. In the event that you find that there is a question or something that you don't understand, again, I reiterate, you can always contact that utility to find out what this is or get a better explanation of why that's on the bill or what that particular charge is for. And we urge consumers to know as much as they can about their bills so that they understand how that billing process works. As part of your bill, you have the right to an explanation. As I said, the bill shows the readings at the beginning and the end of the period for which the bill is rendered, so that you know, okay, I had an issue in January, but that reading in January goes from this date to this date. That information is provided on the bill. It also lets you know the date that the meter is read. And what that does is, we have some consumers who literally read their meters before the company reads the meters. And for those particular customers who really keep up with their usage that way, the date the meter is read is on there so that they will know, okay, the company will read my meter each day around this time period. The date of billing and the latest date on which it can be paid without incurring a penalty. It will give you the date that your bill is due, but it'll also tell you after it's going to be late after this particular date. That information is on there. It also tells you the number and kind of units measured, whether that be therms if it's a gas, or the kilowatts that are used for your bill. The rate schedule or identification of the applicable rates. If the actual rate is not shown, then there should be a statement that shall be furnished upon request. And what that means is, it will tell you the rate that you're paying, whether that be residential for residential customers, a commercial, or some other type of reading that's measurement that's being used, depending on the type of service that you have at your location. Because although we primarily deal with consumers, we also get calls from businesses as well. So that will be indicated on the bill. And the second part of that point is, as I said previously in reference to the meters, sometimes there's something that happens and that reading has not actually been captured. So there may be a time where the bill has to be estimated, but that bill should be identified as estimated if that has had to happen to a consumer. And then an explanation will come advising the consumer, your bill was estimated as a result of, say, a stopped meter, or your bill was estimated because, the meter was locked and we couldn't get to it, or something along those lines. But it has to indicate that there is an estimate if it's not an actual reading. And then it'll also tell you the total amount that you have due, and you have the opportunity to review, because it does give you a breakdown of how that total amount due was incurred and what those charges are made up of. Next, we have overcharges. I kind of briefly touched on that a bit previously, but sometimes there happens to be an overcharge on a customer's account. You have the right to an adjustment if the utility has overcharged or undercharged you. Now, we want to make sure that customers understand that if you have been undercharged, the company does have the right to back bill, and that's what that charge would be. If you're undercharged, that would be classified as a back billing, and a back billing can be a max of 6 months if the time period can be determined. If the time period cannot be determined, then it's the 6 months preceding that actual bill where you had an actual reading. And then sometimes, as I said before, we rarely have those instances, but if you are overcharged, then the company will go back to that time period to tell you what is owed during that time period as well. A lot of times when there is a situation that's energy theft, and we do find situations where there's energy theft, and we have a consumer who has actually been getting power and it's not going through the meter, which means they have not been properly billed from the company, and either through someone reporting it or through an inspection of their meters, the company finds that. And if they can determine how long that meter has been, the energy has been diverted, then they can charge for that entire period. If it's undetermined, then they would do the 12-month preceding that time period. But they do have the right to adjust the billing upward or downward, depending upon what the situation is. Contacting the utility. I keep reiterating this because we want consumers to know they have the right to contact their utility. The utility company will, even after hours, will have some type of on-call person or after hours help desk or someone to receive calls once if the utility happens to be closed during that time for things such as emergencies, unscheduled interruptions, things that may happen to your account that may be one-off situations. The utility is required to have someone to answer those calls and to be able to get you the assistance that you're needing in those emergency type situations. So I do want the customers to know that they do have the right to contact their utility at all hours, even if they're not getting a live person to say help with a payment arrangement or explain their bill. When there are emergencies that arise, they will have someone that they can contact during that time period. Complaints. We do find that consumers will have a complaint with their utility and never contact that utility. And we try to always advise them that as a consumer for the utility, you have the right to contact that utility with complaints. I don't know if sometimes they're afraid of what may happen by complaining to the utility, but the company is unable to resolve the issue if they're not aware of the issue. So we want to make sure that we are explaining to our consumers when we're speaking with them and letting them know you do have the right as a consumer to contact that company with any complaints. And you have the right to have your questions or complaints promptly and thoroughly investigated by the utility. Because they are your direct provider, they are required to give you an explanation of what's going on. They have the access to your accounts. They can see if there's a billing issue. They can explain to you if, say you made a payment, but you received a bill prior to and your payment was made after, and you're thinking your balance should be one thing, but it's showing on the bill is something different. They can explain to you the difference, that your payment was made, but it was made prior to your bill going out. Therefore, your balance looks a little different. But they can tell you, as of this particular time, your balance is X, Y, and Z, because we can see the payment that you've made on the account. And once you've actually talked to that utility and you're still not satisfied with what has happened in that process, then of course you have the right to call the Office of Regulatory Staff Consumer Services Department. And at that point, when you contact our agency, we'll contact the company, get as much information as we can, gather the information from the consumer, and then we'll do our investigation to make sure that the regulations are being upheld. If we find that the consumer is right and there was actually an issue, then we work with the company to get that issue corrected. If in the event we find that there was actually no problem on the company's side, then we go back to the consumer and advise them, these are the facts that we found. This is what your billing is if it's a billing issue. This is what your meter is reading, which will include a meter test and the results of that test. So we will explain to them that there is no issue with your meter. You're being billed properly. You're on the correct rate. So we are not finding an issue with that. And sometimes even after we've gone through all of those processes, they've spoken to the company, they've contacted our agency, we've advised them that we have thoroughly looked at their billing, we've looked at their payment, we've looked at their usage, we've looked at the meter to make sure that the meter is functioning properly. They will still not be satisfied with the response that they've gotten from both the company, the ORS, and at that point, they have the right to file what's called a formal complaint. And this formal complaint will go before the PSC. And you can request a hearing if you're not able to resolve it through our mediation and the non-formal means of us trying to help with that consumer getting that information. And they can simply do that by going to the Public Service Commission's website. And there's a form that they can fill out there on the website. If they have computer access, then they can go right on that website, fill out that form and submit it right there. And they will be able to explain what their grievances are or what they have identified as their issue with whatever their complaint they originally had that they did not get a sufficient an answer that was sufficient for them from either the company or from the Office of Regulatory Staff. As I said previously, we are in a different time right now, and a lot of people are running into situations where they're financially strapped, and we understand that they are. And unfortunately, our agency does not do anything financially to help consumers pay bills, but we definitely understand that those issues arise, and we want to help try to get the information to those customers to be able to help them keep their lights on, to keep their gas on for their families. And that's one of the safety net programs. Electric and natural gas utilities offer safety net programs or benefits to help consumers in certain situations who may struggle to pay their bills. You may be able to take advantage of one of the following. Becoming classified as a consumer who classifies for special consideration. That may be you have someone inside your home who has an oxygen machine, and they have been deemed that without this particular machine, it's life-threatening and that they will need service. So sometimes a lot of the utilities have, I know for Dominion, theirs is the White Cross program, and it will identify your account as one of those special considerations. And now it doesn't stop the service from being disconnected, all the time, but it does in the event of, say, an outage that's active nature, and all the outages out. When they go to work to get the service reconnected, those White Cross customers are identified first, because they do know that unfortunately it wasn't something that was on the side of the company. It was just an act of nature, but they work to get those customers on expeditiously. Not like they don't do it for other customers. I don't want it to sound like that, but they take special attention to those deemed as White Cross, because it is a potentially life-threatening situation in those cases. You can become classified as a medical consumer. And that is, now the medical certificate does allow for the stop of the disconnection of service during a certain period of time. It's December through March, and that's used, now since we're being in a pandemic, companies are doing things a little differently, but under normal circumstances, that medical certificate does stop the disconnection of services for consumers. They have to get a doctor's note. The form is mailed to the consumer. Then that form is taken to the doctor's office, completely filled out from that doctor, and then submitted back to the company. And you cannot do that on your own. It has to be a doctor certified notice, and spread your past due balances over several months. That was what I was explaining earlier with the payment arrangements. As I said, we understand that people are having financial times, and we want to help them keep their lights and their utilities on. So the companies are offering different types of payment plans to be able to help those consumers to not lose their power and to be able to live with those necessities. You may also, when we have situations where the person on the account is elderly, and unfortunately they are may have some early Alzheimer's or some dementia setting in, and they're not aware. They're kind of getting their dates off and in jeopardy of disconnection situations because they're simply not in their right state of mind that they were previously in. Or we have younger adults who are out on their own for the first time, and they're not quite down pat on this whole responsibility things. We have the ability to have another person to receive a copy of that disconnect notice, and that could be their parent, but they would be able to assign or designate what's called a third-party person to that account, so that someone is always aware if there is a disconnection situation potential. And those are the safety net programs that companies have available, and the consumer can simply ask the company specifically which safety net programs they have that are available for them in their area from their particular utility company. As I said before, financial assistance is a huge key from the calls that we get here at the Office of Regulatory Staff. As I said previously, unfortunately, we do not have the ability to provide financial assistance to consumers, but what we do is we refer them to the additional agencies where they can get those financial assistance or the potential to get that, because we never tell them that it's a definite. We do refer them to those community action agents where they have the potential, because we don't know everyone's situation. We don't know, we only know what they're telling us, and we don't request any additional information, but we do refer them to the community action agencies. And our next slide just gives a list of some of those community action agencies that are available to a consumer that they may be able to get some financial assistance from. And we do have brochures that we pass out. They're not only available, when we were meeting face to face, but they're also available on our website for consumers to see and to be able to reach out to. We also will refer them to 211, which is the United Way, which gives them the access to a large group of not only these community action agencies, but sometimes some of the churches and smaller entities that we may not even be aware of that can potentially help a consumer in their financial state. Another resource that we have available is our energy office. And you can visit the energysaver.southcarolina.gov, and you will be able to find energy saving opportunities and assistance programs. Now, one of the things about this, they just launched an energy saving tool that I think is a phenomenal tool. It was launched in August 2020. It gives you information about grants, loans, rebates, tax incentives, potential residential low-income programs, and just other energy saving tips. It's easy to use. It's clear. It's not something that you have to have a PhD to understand. It's a really, really good tool to take a look at, and I definitely suggest everyone making sure that they jot down that website so that you can go and take a look at that tool, because it's a really, really good resource for consumers to be able to use. As with everything, you have scammers. They have the ability to come up with some of the most creative ways to get to money from consumers. And so what we also want to do with it being Consumer Protection Week is get the information out about utility scams. We have gotten calls from businesses, we've gotten calls from consumers in reference to particular scams that they have made available. And this slide here just kind of gives you just a few of the potential that we have heard. Some of these we've actually heard in our area, some of them we have not. The on-site scammers. This is where a scammer actually shows up to a location pretending to be from a utility, offering audits or claiming some type of leak or gas. This is, for me, probably the most dangerous, because the stories that I had heard of these were elderly people. They were actually breaking into their homes using this scam. So when we are talking to consumers, we are urging them, make sure that you're seeing actual ID from people that are coming to your home. If you have not called in a leak, have not heard anything about the leak, don't second guess contacting that utility. If there's someone at your home and they're saying, hey, I need to get inside the home because I've been notified that there's a leak, leave them on the porch, close and lock your door, and call your utility company. They'll be able to tell you, yes, we have technicians out on site. Yes, we have employees out on site. No, we do not. And at that point, you call the local authorities. Another scam that we have seen is unsolicited calls demanding payment for disconnection of service using prepaid cards, gift cards, cryptocurrency, or wire transfers. This a lot of times happens to business. We were getting an influx of those calls during the summer. They were calling businesses, advising them that their services were in jeopardy of being disconnected and requiring them to make these immediate payments through these means. And because the businesses were moving so quickly, and they would call during the prime time, whether that be during their lunchtime or during their prime dinner time, demanding these payments, then we would find that some companies actually would pay them. And then they would contact us after they've had an opportunity to settle down and realize, wait, the utility wouldn't call me at this particular time, this particular way, demanding this type of payment. Or they'd realize, wait, I've actually already paid my bill. And at that point, we're not able to help get that money back. At that point, we have to refer them to other agencies, sometimes to our consumer affairs group, and they may be able to assist them because they've actually been a victim of scam at that point. Phishing emails claiming to be from the utility, seeking to get banking info by providing phony account numbers. You, when in doubt, contact the company, because some of these emails really look legit. So when in doubt, always contact the company. The company will always be able to advise you, yes, we have sent this notification. No, we have not sent this notification. And what they won't be doing is asking for personal information. If the company is sending you notification, they would have that. So you always, when in doubt, reach out to your utility company. Another type of scam we've heard is the equipment or repair, and they may be trying to sell expensive, unnecessary equipment. They'll come to your house claiming that they have some type of equipment that's going to save you all this money, and it's not true. You're really just paying for something. If it's even a product that you actually get, it's not going to do what they say. So be alert on any of these door-to-door people coming to sell you equipment. Claims that you've overpaid and are due a refund, but just to get your banking information. We got an influx of those where they're saying, you paid a bill, but you paid too much, and we just need your banking information so that we can get the refund back to you. The utility company is not going to ask you for that. If you've made the payment to the utility company and it was an overpayment, unless you request it, it's going to go as a credit to your account. So I can help you with that one there. Claims to give preferential treatment to restore service if a fee is paid. And this is usually during storms or major outages. You will not have to pay a fee in order to get your services restored. In the event of some type of storm or some major outage, the utility is working to get your service restored. The restoration process is not going to speed up because you pay a fee to get that done. So that's one of the other scams to be on edge for, because it is definitely a scam. One other way to protect yourself from scams is, as I said before, always ask for an ID. When in doubt, you have that right to ask for an ID. And even after you've asked for that ID, if you still don't feel secure, as I said before, close the door, lock it, call the utility company. Never give out personal information over the phone. When the utility is calling you, majority of the time they're calling with an automated system and they're giving you information. They're not requesting information from you. So they'll give you that information and either hang up or give you the opportunity to call the utility back themselves. They're very rarely asking you for information. But again, as always, my go-to will be, when in doubt, hang up and call the utility directly, not necessarily the number that they called you from, because of course, if they're a scammer, the number that they're calling you from may be spoofed. It may not actually be the right number. So you hang up and you call the utility number that is on your actual bill. And that way you'll get your actual utility company to verify. And never provide them with your bill. Your utility already has that information. As I said before, they're not going to call and ask you for your account number. They already have that if they're your utility company. Like I said, ask questions. If it doesn't feel right, hang up, call your utility directly. You can never go wrong by hanging up and calling your utility directly. If it were your utility company and you decided you were hanging up because it just sounded crazy, then you would still get the correct information. The utility company is not going to be offended because you're protecting yourself. So never worry about that. Never agree to pay or send money without doing your own research and follow-up. A lot of times when it's a scam, they are trying to get you to pay immediately. And they're doing it to make sure that you have not had the opportunity to think. They're doing it to get you off your bearings, and they're making it seem that it's an absolutely urgent situation, and it's not. It's simply a scam. Never let anyone in your home, and I said that previously on the other one, but I cannot reiterate that enough. Never let anyone in your home unless you can confirm that they are employed by the utility. Never feel awkward for calling the utility to verify before allowing someone into your home. It's for your own safety. So you always want to make sure that the person that you're talking to or the person that you're letting into your home has been appointed by the company to be at your home. Your safety is the top priority. Anything else can be worked out. And again, going back to the ORS Consumer Services, what we do, we serve as a mediator between the customers and the investor-owned utilities. So as I said previously, I just want to make sure that whenever you have any questions and you've reached out to your utility and you're not happy, you always have the Office of Regulatory Staff as a resource. So what happens, just kind of be a little more clear on what we do, the consumer will contact us, give us the information, their complaint, their situation that they're trying to get resolved. We take that information and then we reach out to the company to get more information. And at that time, we verify, cross the T's and dot the I's for the consumer. And then we help them to get a resolution in an informal basis, more as a mediator between the two parties so that we can help to get that situation taken care of. Sometimes it doesn't work that we're able to actually get a resolution that the consumer is happy or pleased with. So at that time, the consumer, as I said before, has the right to file what's called a formal complaint. And they do that through the PSC on their online form, and it's simply called a formal complaint. And they can do that online, or they can actually have a hard copy form if they don't have access to internet. They can have a hard copy form mailed to them. They can handwrite it if that's what they need to do and mail that back in. But we do want to reiterate to them that they do have those rights in order to get a complaint resolved. And another point that I want to make, next slide, Landon, I'm sorry, is occasionally we will have potential situations where a consumer has the ability to participate in one of the public hearings that have been set forth either by the company, by a legislator, for a particular situation, whether it be a rate increase or some type of change that's going to affect the consumer that involves the company. And at that point, we urge consumers to participate in those public hearings. That is the consumer's way of being able to let their voice be heard in whatever situation that may be arising. As I said before, whether that's a rate increase or some type of change with their utility that's going to directly affect them. So we urge consumers to get involved in that process. But as with things that you're not used to, it can be a bit overwhelming for a consumer. And what we wanted to do is kind of point out a few of the tips to help make that a little less stressful for a consumer who's not comfortable in a hearing setting or who's not comfortable in a situation that they've never done before. Tip number one is to come early. By coming early, you have the opportunity to grab a seat, kind of settle yourself, you kind of see what's going on in the hearing room, kind of able to get, a lot of times there's handouts that are given out so that you can kind of read up on what's going on and knowing what the situation is and kind of a little more of what to expect. So we urge them, come early so that you're not rushed. Number two, sign up. You have the opportunity when they make these notices and make these meetings public information. And at that time, the consumer has the right to sign up. You can sign up to speak because you have that right as well. And we urge consumers, let your voice be heard. Sign up. They won't, the Public Service Commission won't know the situation that you are particularly dealing with if they don't hear it from you. So we urge consumers, sign up. Talk before the Public Service Commission, get your voice out there, let them know the situation that you're dealing with. Prepare what you want to say in advance. A lot of times in these hearings, you have an environment where emotions are running high, people are upset, they have a lot riding on the outcome of what this particular hearing may be, and sometimes you'll forget what you want to say. You will think about, okay, I wanted to say this, I wanted to say that, but you get so caught in emotion, you don't remember that. So what we tell them is prepare what you want to say. You can write that down, type it out, however you want to prepare it, and you can read that before the Public Service Commission. But that's the best way of being able to make sure that everything that you want them to hear will be presented during that hearing is by preparing in advance what you want to say, whether that's making yourself notes or writing a complete speech out that you want to read before the Public Service Commission. Add your own experience. No one can tell your story like you. So when you're telling why, for example, there's a rate increase, why this rate increase will affect your household, why this rate increase will affect your family, only you can tell that story. So add your own experience. Tell why that situation will affect you negatively. Tell how the impact of this will affect you and your family. Speak slow and clearly. As I said before, sometimes emotions will sometimes get the best of you, and you want to make sure that you're speaking slow and deliberate and clearly, because you want to make sure that your story is told, that your voice is heard, and you don't want to have them miss anything that you have to say, because what you have to say is important. So speak slowly and clearly. Another thing, and remember, this is another option that I think sometimes people don't always remember. If you cannot make a public hearing for whatever reason, whether you're working, whether you may be taking care of an elderly parent or something that won't allow you to attend a public hearing, you do have the right to file what's called a letter of protest. With this letter of protest, it will do the exact same thing as if you were able to speak in person before the Public Service Commission. So again, if you can fill out that letter of protest form, include all the information that you want them to know about you in that information, and you can also send that in, and it will be included in that docket as well, just as if you were physically there in the hearing room during the particular hearing. And finally, we have some additional resources here for you to take a look at. These are just some of the ways that you can get the information out when there's a public service meeting going on. The public service live stream, a lot of times their meetings are live streamed. It gives you the link to both the Public Service Commission and for the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs, which I referenced earlier in reference to if someone is actually scammed financially and they're seeking to get some type of help or direction on getting the refund. And of course, the steps to file an informal complaint with the Office of Regulatory Staff, or if you have a question, you can also have a link to be able to get onto our website to be able to contact us with any questions or complaints. You don't necessarily have to call us. You can actually go online and fill that information out that way as well. And that would be all of the slides that I have. And now I will take it back over to Landon to see if we have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Takesha. I think you lived up to the hype. So I don't think I talked you up too much. You definitely lived up to it. And yeah, I mean, that is such great information. And I think that a lot of times this process, as you said, can be overwhelming, can be daunting. It can seem very intimidating to consumers. And, we're consumers as well. And we're involved in this every day, and it can sometimes seem intimidating. So we want consumers to know that it is really about, making sure, like Takesha said, that your voice is heard, and that if you are supportive or neutral or against anything that is happening, that you at least are able to voice that, and you do have a platform to let that be known. So I don't see any questions that have come through in the chat box, but I would encourage folks, if they do have questions, to continue to put those in the chat box. We did have a comment from Natasha, who was mentioning when you were talking about the community action agencies, that if a consumer has, any issues with contacting the community action agencies, they can reach out to the SCACAP, which is the scacap.org, and would be able to get them into the right direction. And so we're going to send out the recording to this webinar to everyone that registered, as well as the slides from today's presentation. So David, I know you had a comment about joining maybe a couple minutes late. So don't worry, you'll be able to go back and watch that anytime that you'd like to. We'll make that recording available, and the presentation slides as well. So I did have one question to Keisha. So I know that you had mentioned, all of the different things that consumers could do if they have a complaint, an informal, complaint, filling out that form, reaching out to you guys. let's say, they go and they exhaust all of those options. There's a lot of times where sometimes, you want a certain outcome, and it's hard to see, in different situations how that might not be the best outcome for the consumer, or what that can happen, legally. So what can a consumer do? I mean, they still want something to happen. They have a question, and they've exhausted all those options that we just went through.
Now, unfortunately, the next step above us would actually be the Public Service Commission. And once the Public Service Commission, makes their ruling or makes their decision, at that point, as far as the Public Service Commission and ORS, that's all we can do. As a consumer, and of course, we don't provide any legal advice, then the next step they may have would be to seek some outside legal representation if they wanted to escalate that further than our agency, and then ultimately the Public Service Commission. They have that right to be able to get a response that way.
Awesome. And it was pointed out too that all what we're talking about is about the investor-owned utilities. So there are some limitations when it comes to, public utility, other publicly owned utilities, not investor-owned. Right. Do you want to speak maybe to the difference between, an electric cooperative versus an investor-owned utility, and how that, is dealt with?
Most of your municipalities and co-ops are usually made up of a board, and that particular board is who makes the decisions for that particular utility. So, because we have very limited interactions with the co-ops and the municipalities. Therefore, so we will tell a consumer, your first line would be to actually reach out to that board. Put it in writing, because a lot of times putting it in writing gets the attention, because now you have this paper trail to follow back on. So you can put your complaint in writing, send it to the board. At that point, if you have not received the response back from the board, then at that point you have the right to reach out to your city or county council person, because they are your elected official in your area, and they may be able to get more done being the elected official. But again, because it's a municipality or co-op, they usually are made up of a board. So the way that their rules and regulations are done is a little different than the investor-owned, because they actually have written regulations that we do have some jurisdiction over enforcing with that utility, and we don't have the same thing for the municipalities and or the co-ops.
I think that's a great thing to point out. One of the things that I don't think that we covered, but we get a lot of questions about, would be solar, and folks that are approached by a solar installer. They have questions about someone so-and-so had a sign or knocked on my door or whatever. So can you speak maybe a little bit more about that?
Now, I personally am not our solar expert on those types of issues, but we do have an investigator here who's proficient in solar related issues. So if there are additional solar related questions, you can definitely reach out to our agency, and we can get you, even if you reach out to me, I can get you to that particular investigator to assist with that. But we do have limited jurisdiction over some of the solar situations. A lot of it, though, we don't have jurisdiction over, unfortunately. And we were hearing a lot of stuff, the previous summer when they were kind of out and about heavy promoting the solar. But as far as the jurisdiction, we have very limited jurisdiction. But again, for any questions that you may have, feel free to reach out to Consumer Services, and we will definitely get you in contact with our investigator who's more proficient in our solar issues.
Yeah, I think some of the common, scams, or just the advice you gave about scams for, your electric or your natural gas utility would be applicable as well with solar. You're asking questions, you're protecting yourself, you're, getting paperwork, you're all this kind of stuff that you can do to protect yourself as a consumer. And if you do have a question, we, as the agency, regulate solar leasing. So we can tell you, if that company is, certified to actually do
Mhm.
solar leasing in our state. And then consumer affairs as well would be able to answer some of those questions about purchasing solar if there's issues that you have that come up there. I'll plug as well. We have solar.sc.gov, which is our state website for solar information. Takesha mentioned energysaver.sc.gov, which is a great resource from the Energy Office. And then there's also ors.sc.gov, which is a great source for information if you have questions about our agency or want to get the contact information for different folks to reach out for more information. But with that, I want to thank everyone for joining. Thank you to Keisha so much for giving us all this wonderful information. Um, Once again, this is National Consumer Protection Week. I'd encourage you to reach out to Takesha if you have any questions or myself, but also register for those other webinars because Takesha is actually doing another great presentation on water wastewater. We have another presentation on telecommunications and then transportation. So those will be held tomorrow and Thursday. So register for those, ors.sc.gov/consumers. And we thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.